Biden failed totally on the pandemic, and he's now overseeing the greatest foreign policy humiliation in the history of the United States of America. This is the greatest humiliation I've ever seen. Vietnam looks like a masterclass in strategy compared to Joe Biden's catastrophe. And it didn't have to happen. All he had to do is leave the soldiers there until everything's out. Our citizens, our weapons. Then you bomb the hell out of the bases. We have 5 bases. And you say, bye-bye.
And that was former President Donald J. Trump at his Alabama rally this past weekend. And can I just tell you, I miss him terribly. I wish he was in charge right now of this great country. But we have a great show tonight at CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. Joining us, KT McFarland, national security expert and ACU board member, and president of Concerned Women for America, Penny Nance. Let us start with our breaking news, chaos in Kabul, and I bring in KT McFarland. KT, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure and an honor.
Well, let's just get right to this. You have been watching the chaotic scenes that are happening at the Kabul airport. Americans still in Afghanistan, our allies, Afghan supporters who have helped our troops during this process. What's your analysis thus far?
Well, it couldn't have been handled worse. I mean, I think you need to separate 2 questions. One, should we have gotten out? Yes, we should get out. But number 2, how should we get out? And that's where the Biden administration has just been so feckless and irresponsible and cruel and heartless to Americans as well as to Afghan allies. You know, we have Americans who cannot make it to Kabul airport. And President Biden has said, get to Kabul airport, we'll get all Americans out. But if Americans can't make it there because they're detained in their village 5 hours drive north of Kabul, then I guess they're just going to be stranded and stuck. And there's increasing evidence that there are a lot of Americans, little pockets of them here and there all around the country, that are not able to be rescued. So as President Trump, if he'd been president, you know what would have happened? He would have been rescuing these people all along, and he wouldn't have been in this mess. I mean, President Trump talked to the guy who's now running Afghanistan, the Taliban leader, and he said, look, we're leaving, and if you harm 1 hair on the head of any Americans, if you even threaten any Americans, we know where you live, your family lives, your cousins are. We are coming to get you, and make no mistake, we are leaving, but we want to leave unimpeded. And we want to leave in an orderly fashion. And don't you dare try to hurt Americans. And so now what do you have? You have a President Biden who doesn't even understand. I mean, he doesn't even realize that their Americans are there or stranded. Or if he does, I guess he doesn't care. They have no real plan to rescue Americans. And so I guess the bigger picture, I have 2 issues. One, what happens in Afghanistan? How do we get our Americans out? And number 2, is this, I think it's the end point of the Biden presidency. He will never recover from this. But will America recover? And that's why I'm so concerned with looking forward, as we do at American Conservative Union, to the elections in 2022 and the election, most importantly, in 2024, and to put a new American president in, like we did in 1980 with our sort of patron saint of CPAC, Ron.
Yeah, it's quite shocking. I think 2 big points here. One, that the press secretary, Jen Psaki, said that Americans are not stranded. Let's listen to her press conference from yesterday.
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for saying that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan when we have been very clear that we are not leaving Americans who want to return home. We are going to bring them home. And I think that's important for the American public to hear and understand.
Okay.
So I thought that was a very strong, interesting statement coming from Jen Psaki, saying Americans, they're not stranded. And then you've got between the State Department and the Pentagon, they really don't know how many Americans are still in Afghanistan. It just seems like a chaotic approach coming from the Biden administration where they're not giving straight answers. What do you think?
You know, I'm not buying this. We don't know where the Americans are. If every American over there has a cell phone, right? We can track where those Americans are. We can go ask Apple, where are all those iPhone pings coming from? So I'm not buying the fact that we don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. We don't know how many of them are. We do know, or we could know if we chose to look. Here's what I'm really concerned with is every time Jen Psaki or any of the officials, particularly President Biden, say, we'll evacuate all Americans who, quote, want to leave. Keep your eye on that phrase, want to leave. They're going to claim a week from now that if Americans didn't make their way to Kabul airport, that must be an indication that they didn't want to leave. That's not true. We are leaving Americans there, and I see at this point no willingness and no plan to go rescue them. I hope I'm wrong, because we certainly have the capability to do it, but I think this is such a risk-averse president. He's so afraid of the bad headline or the picture that makes him look weak that he's not doing the right thing. The right thing is no Americans left behind.
Well, KT, I did find this so interesting. It was in the op-ed on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, where the Taliban spokesperson made it clear when he said the U.S. president had better not extend his deadline, this deadline of August 31st, for having all U.S. troops out of the country past that day. So we've got the Taliban telling the United States of America, setting the red line of what we can and cannot do. I just find that to be such an insult to our country.
You know, a ragtag militia leader is telling the United States of America what we can and can't do. And I would be on the phone and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get all of our Americans out, and we know where you are. We know where you live, to quote Donald Trump. And guess what? If you don't let us out of that Kabul airport, we're going to bomb that Kabul airport. We have several perfectly good airports all around the country. We want to use those. You don't want to open those up to us? Great. We're going to bomb your headquarters. We have the ability to do an awful lot of stuff if we only had the will to do it. And the second problem, I guess I have in this sort of big picture as an American, we look so incompetent. We look so helpless. We look so frail. We look so indecisive. Since the Industrial Revolution, America's mantra has been, we're the can-do nation. We'll figure it out. We'll do it. We're the tough guys. You know, we're the guys who saved World War II. We're the guys who saved Europe from World War I. We're the guys who defeated the Soviet Union. And now, ragtag bunch of guys in a militia, half of whom are illiterate, and they're bossing us around. I really worry about the image that this leaves in the minds of our enemies and our friends going forward. That's why I'm really concerned with that darn election in 2024, that we get a real leader who steps back up to the plate and makes America great.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of buyer's remorse with those, especially those Republicans who voted for Joe Biden. But I do have to ask you a question with the Taliban. If in fact we can't get out of there by August 31st, which I think is a very difficult date to be able to get organized and get all the Americans out and all of our allies out. Will this escalate? I mean, could this lead to our troops going in, as you mentioned, bombing the airport? Really, what can we see in terms of a possible escalation?
Well, I think you see maybe three options here. One, the Biden administration somehow cuts a deal with the Taliban, probably for a lot of money. And we extend the deadline, we get more Americans out, hopefully all Americans out. The other thing is that the Taliban just orders us around and we leave. And the Biden administration says, well, the people we didn't leave anybody behind, it was just people who really didn't want to leave. And that'll be their excuse. They're always constantly spinning and blaming and whinging and, you know, man, suck it up, guys. It's a tough job. But the third option would be to have some kind of a temporary, limited, objective-driven escalation to get our Americans out. I mean, to me, a rescue mission is not an escalation. It's not an invasion. It's not a whatever. It's get our people out and go home. And that is an option. There's a terrific phrase that Americans had going back to Teddy Roosevelt. We want Americans out alive or we want those Afghans dead. And that's this case. In Teddy Roosevelt's day, it was about Libyan pirates. But the same thing holds true. We want our people out or you're going to pay a price, not the other way around. This tail is not wagging this dog, Mr.
Yeah. I just wonder, because I would think that Joe Biden would be so hesitant to move in a direction of escalation or bomb Afghanistan. I just think that would make his base very, very nervous.
Yeah, I think they'll be perfectly comfortable they'll spin his excuse that no Americans really were left behind. It was only the ones who wanted to stay. And then his base and the loony left and the lapdog media will all just move on to the next thing. They'll take their eyes off this. The world won't take their eyes off this.
Yeah, no.
Hope the American people.
I agree. One quick question on the Russians. They have said that they are ready to mediate in Afghanistan, meaning it would be Russia, China, the United States, and Pakistan, quite a crew there, to help in this crisis in Afghanistan. Talk about what this means from a national security perspective in terms of now Russia really inserting themselves once again in Afghanistan, China playing a role. How does this change the dynamics in the Middle East and how this impacts our loss of power in that region?
Look, I don't think Afghanistan is a country where we have a vital national interest. We achieved our objective in December of 2001, which was to run al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. And since then, the mission has been to nation build. I'm going to look and say, let's assume we get Americans out somehow or other. What happens to Afghanistan? Okay, there are countries who have interests, and as you point out, Pakistan has an interest and is closely allied with the eastern tribes of Afghanistan. Iran has an interest. It's closely allied with the tribal areas in western Afghanistan. The Russians have a lot of unfinished business in Afghanistan, and they have ethnic minorities of the same ethnicity as in northern Afghanistan tribes. And the Chinese, they want the resources. So I think America leaves, and the Taliban, which today looks like a very unified force, it's not. It's made up of a lot of these different tribes, each of whom want to fight each other and historically have fought each other for 2,000 years. I think they continue to fight each other. I think Afghanistan, after America, is a multi-party civil war, each unit backed by a different country in the region, and they're all the bad guys. Now, from my perspective, from America's perspective, I don't really think that's a bad thing. I'm delighted at the thought that Pakistan, China, Russia, Iran, they're all going to be busy fighting each other in Afghanistan. To me, that's an okay scenario from my perspective as soon as we get Americans out.
Oh, that's interesting. But aren't there concerns as well that that there would be increased terrorist threats? We know that the Taliban sheltered al-Qaeda members, and this could lead to this fostering or growth of more terrorist cells in that region?
Yeah, but as long as they're fighting each other, I'm comfortable with that. Now, look, will there be an increase in bad guys and terrorists from the Middle East wanting to do bad things around the world? Yes. Will their ability be there? Not like it was. And that's why I would say to anybody, any Gold Star family or anyone, and I'm from a military family as well.
Yes.
But anybody who had sacrificed or whose family members had been there, it was not for nothing. Because even though their leaders failed them, even though the generals trotted up to Capitol Hill year after year and said just a few more American military, a couple more thousand, a few more $1 billion, another month or two, maybe a year, we're going to win in Afghanistan, the generals failed them. The intelligence community, who never saw anything coming, they didn't see al-Qaeda in the first place, and they didn't see what's happened now. Though they didn't see anything. Well, they failed Americans. And our political leaders of both parties, frankly, they failed Americans because they kept saying, we're going to build a modern democracy in Afghanistan, and they're never going to let terrorists back in Afghanistan because it's going to be a modern, thriving democracy. They failed us. But the people who didn't fail us were the men and women who were on the ground. And what they did is they bought time. They bought 20 years. The goal in my mind was never create a modern democracy in Afghanistan or to build some great Afghan military. It was to keep the fight someplace else and to buy time until the United States could put in place a lot of those mechanisms where we could stop terrorist activities and attacks against America. For example, we now see how money moves around the globe. It's not going to be possible for for a terrorist group to move billions or hundreds of millions of dollars around from one part of the country to another. We have the mechanism in place to look at that, to see it, to stop it, and to halt it, and to actually chase it down to its source. So I think we bought the time we needed. The battle place has now changed. The fight is no longer in the Middle East. The fight is now going to be in cyberspace, and it's going to be against China, and to a lesser extent, Russia. So will terrorism reemerge? Had we stayed there, would it have reemerged? It's not a problem that we can't deal with now. It's a problem, but it's not an existential threat to the future of the United States like it was 20 years ago.
So I want you to listen to this Matt Schlapp tweet. I thought that was really interesting. He said, when caravans crashed our southern border during the Trump administration, Democrats transfixed national tension on separated children. Now Americans face death and separation in Afghanistan, and it is all about an arbitrary date and doing what we can. This juxtaposition is everything. I think that we see, KT, the fact that there is chaos in what we're seeing in Afghanistan, chaos at the southern border. How is the Biden administration ever going to survive this?
They won't. It's done. I mean, I was old enough to be around in the 1970s, even 60s, but 1970s, when Jimmy Carter was elected, very much like Joe Biden, to be a unifier, to heal the nation after Watergate and the Vietnam War, the man who was going to do everything right. And then within a year or two, the economy was in bad shape, and we were getting pushed around by our adversaries. And so once that perception of incompetence with Carter and weakness with Carter, he could never recover. And then as that perception sort of flew around the world, then other countries started taking advantage of us in various parts of the world. The Russians expanded. The Iranians took American diplomats hostage. The Middle East Arab oil producing countries jacked up the price of oil. So every country perceives weakness, and then they think, this is my moment to act. What it did do, so Carter never recovered. And he goes down in history as probably one of the worst presidents in American history. But he paved the way for Ronald Reagan, who could come in and do a clean sweep and get the nation behind him to do very radical things, revolutionary things with the American economy, American foreign policy, American defenses. And so I'm only hopeful that the United States recovers, even though I don't think Joe Biden does. He will never, ever be able to reclaim the mantle of competence and coherence and strength. He looks weak, he looks passive, he looks confused, and he looks incompetent. He'll never recover.
Well, I got to tell you, I think President Biden has turned his back on the Afghan people, those who have supported us. He's turned his back on America. And, and what's so unfortunate, KT, is the one who follows, Kamala Harris, is not any better. So I think the Democrat strategists definitely have their hands full in figuring out who's going to take up the mantle. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead.
I think what will happen is that, like with Lyndon Johnson in a failed presidency, the Democrats are going to pressure Joe Biden to announce in a year from now he's not running for re-election. And then it's open field, because if they wait, he can't be reelected. And if they wait and then they're stuck with the vice president, Kamala Harris, probably the single most unpopular person in the country, the Democrats know they're going to go down. So my prediction is that within the year, Joe Biden will announce that he is not running for re-election, at which point all bets are off and every Democrat is going to scamper to say that they're running too. They'll all head to New Hampshire. We better be there too, don't you think?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I think the 2022 elections will be very telling as well. If they lose the House majority, which I think is very likely, and if Republicans are able to gain ground, that's going to be a significant message that they're sending to the Biden administration, to the Democrats, saying they've gone too far and obviously have created a big mess, not only here in the United States, but across the globe. But KT, we want to thank you so much. Your insight is always so helpful in understanding what's going on in the national security space. So thank you for joining us on CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. And we'll be right back with Penny Nance from Concerned Women for America.
Biden's botched exit in Afghanistan is the most astonishing display of gross incompetence by a nation's leader, perhaps at any time that anybody's ever seen. Name another situation like this.
That was former President Donald J. Trump at the Alabama rally this past weekend. And I got to tell you, he was on fire, talking about the gross incompetency of the Biden administration, especially in his dealings in Afghanistan. And we want to talk about this and a lot more with a dear friend of ACU and CPAC, President and CEO for Concerned Women for America, Penny Nance. Penny, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great being with you, Mercy, and always with ACU and CPAC. I'm just grateful to be with you today.
Well, you've got a big event happening tomorrow, Wednesday, an Afghan rally and prayer vigil, specifically praying for the Afghan women and children. Talk to us about the event, what's going to happen, and why was it so important to pull this together?
You know, like most Americans, we at Concerned Women for America have watched the news horrified as we're seeing what's unfolding, the violence and the terror that's unfolding in Afghanistan. And what's so shocking is that the Biden administration is abandoning our allies who put their own lives on the line, who have worked alongside us for 2 decades. You know, it's interesting to me, and this just kind of hit me yesterday. I have a son that's 20 years old. He was a baby in the crib when September 11th happened. And Mercy, I know you and Matt have children that weren't even born on September 11th. So, you know, we have to go back and explain to them why we're even in Afghanistan. We're in Afghanistan because terrorists plotted from there, Al-Qaeda, headed by Osama bin Laden with the aid and blessing of the Taliban, plotted from Afghanistan and then flew planes into our Pentagon and into the Twin Towers in New York and killed almost 3,000 Americans. They killed them in cold blood. And we sat in our homes and we cried our eyes out and we prayed. And our U.S. military did what they do, and they went in and they took care of business. And so we've been there for 20 years, and every president since George Bush has talked about us leaving and leaving it in a way that kept us safe. And so we all agree, yes. And President Trump said we're going to bring our military out of Afghanistan. Okay, we agree with that. But what the Biden administration is, they rushed ahead. They didn't listen to the military. They didn't listen to the intelligence community, and they're leaving a mess. And the people that we worked alongside, our interpreters, people that were our resources, now their families are going to be murdered and their daughters are going to be sold into sex slavery. And they're being told that an ex should be put on the side of their house if they have a daughter at 12 or older, so that she can be the spoils of war for Taliban fighters. I'm not okay with that. And Concerned Women for America is not okay with that. And I believe that God in heaven is brokenhearted in what he's seeing, that innocents are being hurt right now. And so we're joining together, and I feel very passionately about this, as you can tell. We're joining together with, you're going to be there, Mercy, and others going to be there. Christian women are coming together to pray for other women in Afghanistan, and also to pray for our military and our military personnel who are basically being held hostage there right now by the Taliban, who are in a position of strength. But God sees. In fact, Psalm 34 says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those that fear him. That's our verse as we go forward tomorrow. So we'll be praying. We'll be spending time together and really lifting up before the Lord this horrible situation that needs a miracle. We will be praying for a miracle tomorrow.
So, Penny, if people are interested in going, where can they register? Where do they show up? What do you want to tell our audience?
So, come to concernedwomen.org. You can sign up and get information there. But basically, at 11 a.m. tomorrow, at Lafayette Park, right across from the White House, because we want President Biden to look out his window and to see us there. We will be there with American flags and with Afghan flags, and we will be there together, women of faith, and many important leaders. If you come to our website, you can see all the names. Several members of Congress will be there. It's a very important time. Jenna Ellis, who many of you know, plans to be there. Andy Botner from Independent Women's Forum will be there. A woman who was held in prison in Sudan, who knows what is ahead for Christians in Afghanistan, because, by the way, the news is telling us that if they take their phones and if they find a Bible app on their phone, they murder them on the spot. So we're going to have Miriam Ibrahim, who spent a long time in a Sudanese prison, even gave birth to her second child in shackles in a Sudanese prison because she's a Christian, to discuss, what that means for Christians in Afghanistan. So everybody's welcome. We're also going to have it live on Facebook. So if you can't come, if you live too far away, follow us on Facebook. But we'd really love it for you to be there and to come join us in prayer in person.
Well, I think it's such an important event to have right now, and I think it's an important message to send to the Biden administration that obviously their approach on handling Afghanistan has been horrific, and I think we're going to see so many more of these tragic stories, unfortunately, unfold in Afghanistan, especially with the Afghan women and children. I have to tell you, Penny, we all are heartbroken by this idea that the Taliban is going to be, quote unquote, more moderate or more inclusive or protect the rights of women in Afghanistan. It's just all a fraud. What do you believe is going to happen to these women and children who are being left behind?
Well, I think history has informed us. Like, we know what happened before, because they have a very radical view of Sharia law. And so what they say is, we believe in the rights of women under Sharia law. So, they're couching their terms very carefully so that they recognize, again, that in their belief system, under Sharia law, that women have no rights and that they shouldn't actually go to school. And if they disobey their husbands, they can be flogged. And if, God forbid, they do something that they consider immoral, they can be stoned to death. I mean, it is the most violent regime and the most just horrific circumstance that you can possibly imagine for women. And so everything that the Biden administration has said that they believe in women's rights is absolutely an anathema to what the Taliban's going to do to women. By the way, we are welcome liberal women to come join us. This shouldn't just be conservative women standing up on behalf of women. I've not heard one peep out of the left on this when it comes to women's rights. And we welcome them to come and pray with us on this, because everyone should be joined in solidarity for these women. And, the ones of course, you can't bring every woman here, right? I mean, as much as we'd like to, it can't be done. We can, though, negotiate on their behalf. We should have been thinking in terms of setting up a government in order for them to be spared. But there's women commandos, Mercy. You may not even be aware of this. There were women commandos in the Afghan army who were amazing. And those women have got to be brought out with their families. They will be murdered immediately. They risked it all. The Afghan army lost 50,000 plus people. It's not like that they were not engaged in this partnership with the American people. They were. And so we cannot turn our backs on our allies. If we do that, we send a message to the rest of the world that you can't trust America. And I think we're trustworthy. The American people are good to our word. We meant what we said, and we need to follow through on our promises.
It's really interesting that you said that. It's not only not trust America, but they're viewing America from weakness. We're in a position of weakness right now, which I think is so debilitating to us, just not only internally, but externally. And I think you're seeing this weakness appear in President Joe Biden's poll numbers, where he, based on how he's dealt with the spike in the COVID cases, also the bipartisan criticism on this chaos from America's withdrawal from Afghanistan, his approval ratings are dropping below 50% for the first time. And this is early in the presidency. Can President Biden recover?
Well, I don't know, but I think, Mercy, you and I know people of faith who are very sorry for their vote this last November. I think there's a lot of buyer's remorse. I mean, I recognize that not everyone loved Donald Trump, and there was things about Donald Trump that I don't love. You know, there was things about his Twitter feed that I didn't love, but I liked his policies. And we would not be in this shape right now if he had been president, been reelected. I truly don't believe that. But regardless, this is where we are. And so people have to consider that elections have consequences. Whether you stay home and you don't vote, or whether, you know, you don't really pay attention to the issues, you don't like someone's, perhaps their personality, that is so superficial. You need to be informed. You know, I'm preaching to the choir because people watching this certainly are the most informed. ACU followers and Concerned Women for America members certainly are very informed people. But we've got to make sure that those that are in our Sunday schools and in our churches and in our moms' play groups, that are in our Christian schools, that they all recognize that elections matter. And not only, you know, we can talk about on and on about foreign policy and what a failure we are at this moment and how weak we appear on the world stage. It's embarrassing and it's outrageous. But also hundreds, billions of dollars that are flying into the coffers of the abortion industry at the hands of the Biden administration. This is an administration that never met an abortion they didn't like, and they're happy to fund it with your tax dollars and my tax dollars. So we have got to measure and understand what people's policies are, not just their personality. And we've got to make sure that their positions square with our faith. I mean, it's just not enough to be a nice guy. It really matters what kind of leadership we have. And we've got to pray for, and in fact, the Bible tells us to pray for our leaders. So as angry as I am praying for Joe Biden, and I'm praying, for the military and leaders, and General Milley and others. And I just would say that's what we're going to do, because we're told to pray for our leaders, and we're praying for the Lord to open their eyes and to work on their heart.
Yeah, well, I'm praying that Joe Biden resigns, but that's just me, Penny. But, I got to tell you, I'm sure many of our viewers would, I'm sorry?
I'll give you the microphone on that.
Okay, good. But I do think that it is a moment of spiritual awakeness in our country. It's a moment where Christians and people of faith need to come together to understand what's really at risk, which is that of losing this great country. It is pushing back on these politicians that push what I would say are anti-God policies. And so that is, I think, one of the big priorities. I am looking so forward to joining you and all these wonderful, strong women tomorrow at the Afghan rally and prayer vigil. It's going to be a very special event. We'll make sure that we cover it as well here on CPAC Now America Uncounseled. Penny Nance, thanks again for joining me. And I want to leave you all with an interview that I did with a former child bride from Afghanistan. She was married at the age of 14 years old. She was able to escape that situation, and she shares an incredible story. So stay with us. Welcome back to Wake Up America. I'm Mercedes Schlapp. As the Taliban sweeps across Afghanistan, women's freedoms are under threat. Joining us to talk about the situation there and her story is Afghan-American human rights activist, as well as a psychotherapist and an adjunct faculty member at Pacific Oaks College in San Jose, Nahid Fatahi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Nahid, your story is something that I think everyone should hear. You were a child bride in Afghanistan. Tell us what happened and why this occurred during the Taliban brutal rule.
You said it. I was a child bride, and the reason it happened is because my parents, my family feared that I will never be able to go to school or go back to school and finish my education. So they literally had to make a choice in between sending me away as a child bride or allowing me to live under the government of the Taliban and suffer like millions of women did from 1994 to 2001.
Nahid, how old were you?
I was 14.
14 years old. And there was a moment where you had a suicide attempt. And you share this story in one of the articles that you wrote. So there was this Afghan neighbor that came to you and said, fight for your freedom, said you can't continue to waste away. Why was that moment so critical in your life?
I needed to hear that. I grew up in a family that loved peace. But during those years that I was separated from them, I forgot those. I forgot those values even. And that neighbor reminded me of those values. And that's when I felt like I had the courage to do what I had to do.
Well, now we're seeing, Nahid, the current situation in Afghanistan, the failure of the Biden administration, where they've abandoned the Afghan forces. Taliban, they're in charge right now. So women are being forced to marry these Taliban fighters and are being banned from leaving their homes without a male companion. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking right now about this current situation?
You know, me and millions of Afghans are re-traumatized. We are seeing the dark era of the Taliban right in front of our eyes. Although they have said that they are not going to go back to their old ways of ruling, we can only assume what they will do based on the history that they've already proved to us. And therefore, I'm frightened, and Afghan women are frightened, and all human rights activists are frightened for the people of Afghanistan and Afghan women.
What are your thoughts about how the United States has handled their involvement in Afghanistan so far?
It was done extremely, I would say, with no plan. I mean, it appeared that there was no plan in this regards. Human rights activists foresaw this when President Trump started the peace talk with the Taliban. We warned the government, we warned President Trump, and then later President Biden to be more transparent during these peace talks. However, all Afghans and actually people around the world did not see this coming, not the way it actually came. And obviously, the withdrawal was, although they are claiming that it was planned, it just seemed as abrupt as we saw it unfolding in front of our eyes.
Let me, Nahid, get your quick response on this. You tweeted concern for the livelihood of mothers in particular. As a mother of a young lady yourself, how worrisome is the state of Afghanistan right now? And how does that affect how you're raising your own family? I'm worried. I'm extremely anxious. And as a therapist, I think it is fair to say that, I have been re-traumatized. I am looking into ways on how to continue
my voice and how to help the women inside Afghanistan, help the girls, and essentially help the people. Because remember, if women are suffering, if women don't have freedom, if women don't get education, we are talking about half of the population, and that means that will be the end of a nation.